Hello everyone, FPL Raptor here and welcome back to another video on my YouTube channel. In today's video we have my Game Week 13 preview where we're going to focus on captaincy because it's a big decision this week and also the best forwards to buy as well, especially if you're looking to sell Erling Haaland. If you did enjoy today's video, please do smash the like button, and if you're new around here, make sure to subscribe as well. But without further ado, let's jump into it. So guys, usually for these Game Week preview videos, I try and discuss maybe 5 topics in a little bit of detail, quite a lot of detail, maybe sometimes even as many as sort of 6 or 7. But for Game Week 13, when I asked for your questions on Twitter and on Blue Sky, it was honestly only 2 things that were widely asked, which is who is the best Game Week 13 captain, because it feels pretty wide open this week. And then also, which forward should you be looking to bring in, especially if you're selling Erling Haaland this week? Like, who is the best forward price considered to bring in? So we're going to focus in on those 2 topics in a little bit more detail than normal and not cover anything else because those are the only 2 things that you really wanted my opinion on. But within that, we are discussing the best premiums and also a lot about the forwards and whether you should sell Haaland. So there should still be enough value. By the way, I'm recording this in the middle of the day and there are building works going on outside. So apologies if you do hear a little bit of background noise, but fingers crossed the mic doesn't pick up too much of it. So on captaincy, I'm going to do a massive caveat before I discuss this. As content creators, firstly, we are trying to predict the future, which is incredibly difficult to do. But I do tend to back my judgment and analysis and opinion over a longer sample size. So if you were to come to me and say, Ross, which forward do you think is the best to bring in over the next 6 to 8 weeks? I generally think I give very good advice because you can use data and eye test, you can look at fixtures, and over a larger sample size, you don't have those massive elements of luck which can massively swing a decision. However, when we're talking about things such as captaincy and benching decisions in a single week, I can't tell you what will happen in a single week because football is so unpredictable and luck is so much more prevalent in a single game week. I didn't think Wolves would put 4 goals past Fulham in a million years. I didn't think Spurs would put 4 goals past City and keep a clean sheet. So things like I would have benched Pedro Porro. I honestly wouldn't have mind benching CUNHA. I didn't expect Erling Haaland to blank in a single week. So I feel like with captaincy and benching decisions, it's so much more difficult to get it right and to give good advice because there is such a large element of luck in FPL regardless. But in a single week, it's obviously exemplified even more. So yeah, captaincy is always a very difficult one. You'll probably notice that content creators do often swerve captaincy, but every single week I will try my best to talk about it and give you my advice. So what I've got here on this list is, in my opinion, the 8 best captaincy options. You'll notice there is no Erling Haaland. It's Liverpool away, and also he's just not in a very good run of form, and City aren't. So you could go for Haaland if you wanted to, but I back players with better fixtures or in better runs of form. So I've got the 8 best captains. I've got the fixture that they've got. I've got their non-penalty expected goals per 90 this season, which is their goal threat. Their non-penalty expected assists per 90, which is their assist threat. The opponent XGC rank, which means that if that is 20th, they are playing against the worst defence in the league. If it is first, they are the best defence in the league, the team they're playing against. I've got the bookies percentage chance of a goal at this very early stage of the week. It does often update the closer we get to the deadline. And then obviously 100% would mean they are definitely going to score according to the bookies. 0% would mean they have no chance. And then I've also got, is it a good positional matchup? So I've looked at where the teams concede most of their chances from that they're playing against. And if that player plays in that position, it's got a tick because it's a good positional matchup. And if it's got a cross, it means that isn't where the team concedes most of their chances. That doesn't mean that they won't score goals and get assists. It just means that it's not necessarily a weak point of the opponent that they're going up against. So, with all of that put together, obviously if we're going based on form and what he has done this season, Mohamed Salah is the best captaincy option every single week. He's got 8 double-digit returns in 12 weeks. He's averaging exactly 10 points per game week, which is a joke. Last season, he had 9 double-digit returns, and he's got 8 already this season. Last season, he had 24 bonus points across the entire season, and this season, he's on 23. So one more double-digit return with at least 1 bonus, and Salah has basically done what he did last season in terms of haul ability and explosiveness, which just goes to show, firstly, the new bonus point system massively suits Mohamed Salah, but also the man is playing ridiculously well under slot. So everything is pointing towards Salah. And it doesn't really stop there because, yes, if you look at the fixture difficulty rating colour scheme, City is the only difficult game here on paper. But over the last 6 game weeks, City are like 15th for expected goals conceded. They're one of the worst defences in the league. They've just shipped 4 goals to Spurs. And honestly, Spurs could have had more. In the Champions League, they were 3-0 up in the 75th minute and conceded 3 goals in the space of 17 minutes. They are not defending well. The other thing that I said, and I spoke about this on FPL Therapy, where City seem to be getting really hurt, and this was the case against Feyenoord once again if you watch the goals, they are getting really, really badly hurt, especially at the end of the games and especially in transition. City commit a lot of men forward even when they're winning, but they don't really just sit back and defend. They're often highly committed. Most of their players are up the pitch, which means on the counter-attack, they are so weak. And we've seen that against Adama Traore earlier on in the season. He had an absolute field day. Where is Salah at his best? Salah is best in transition, and Salah is best at the end of games. So even if Salah's blanking at 75 minutes against City, I'm probably sat there feeling very confident that he gets chances in the final 15 minutes. If you combine that with the fact that now that we've removed Haaland from this list, Salah's got the best non-penalty expected goals out of all of the captaincy options I would consider this week. He's also got a bit of creativity, although looking at the other players on this list, they're all more creative. So you're not owning him for that creativity. The positional matchup is also very good. Now, City, I've actually cheated slightly here. City actually concede most of their chances through the centre of the pitch, but on their left-hand side, which is where Guardiola plays, they could almost conceded as many chances as through the centre. So it is still a really good matchup for Salah. And we actually saw against Spurs that Guardiola was at fault for at least a couple of the goals. So I look at this and I just think everything here for me points towards this being a really, really good game for Mohamed Salah. The fact that he's in form, the fact that City aren't, the way that City set up, where they've been vulnerable. The only thing, in fact, let's say 2 things. I still trust Pep Guardiola as a coach. And whilst he seems to be really struggling at the moment, he does often find solutions. And in these big games, you do just never know. Now, Salah's got a great record against City, but there feels more unpredictability when you put 2 traditionally good sides together. For example, Spurs versus City, it was very unpredictable. I just think this game, if it did end 1-1, I wouldn't be like, wow, I'm so massively shocked about that. I would just be like, yeah, maybe based on the form you expected Liverpool and Salah to do more. So, I mean, I've just spoken about Salah for over 5 minutes there, but I think it's an interesting one because if you just sit back objectively and look at everything that we've got going right now, it probably does point towards Salah being the best captaincy option. In terms of the only other player without like a plumb standout fixture, it's Cole Palmer. And I know people really don't rate Villa. And Villa, over the last 6 or 7 games, have barely picked up any points and they have been struggling. They just shipped 2 goals to Crystal Palace. But they are 5th this season for expected goals conceded. Now, Palmer, I think, has been very unlucky not to get more returns in the last 5. But I think he's got 1 goal in the last 5 games in the Prem. He's not really doing it massively. But this is a game where I could see him doing well. It strikes me as the similar sort of game to when he got his 25-pointer against Brighton. Again, in the similar way to Salah, Palmer is very good in transition when he can get a little bit of space in those central positions. And I think Villa will afford that to him. I think it is a game where he can get on the ball in those central roles. And really, if Madueke hadn't blocked his shot on the line, Cole Palmer's probably come away, he might have even got bonus points. He's probably come away with like 9 points in that game. And if Cole Palmer got a 9-pointer last week, I think a lot more people are considering him versus him obviously getting the 2-pointer in the blank. The only thing I would say is Villa aren't weak at all through the centre or through the left. They concede almost every single one of their chances through their right-hand side, which is where obviously like Matty Cash in the past or Konsa or any of their other players have played at right back. That's where they're at their weakest. So it's not really where Cole Palmer operates as much. But that doesn't necessarily mean everything. I still think Cole Palmer is probably in my top 3 or 4 captaincy options, and I may well go for him because I like the fact that it's a home fixture and I still back Cole Palmer as being an absolutely elite asset. But it's maybe not the standout fixture that I thought it would have been maybe 6 or 7 game weeks ago. You know, when Cole Palmer was bagging goals for fun and also Villa looked really weak at points. I just think it's a decent fixture. He's a good captaincy option, but I don't think he's the standout. After Salah and Palmer, we then move on to, obviously, everyone's got a green fixture on the FDR rating. All of them are playing at home apart from Bukayo Saka. And honestly, there's justification to pick all of them. I actually think if I'm not using like emotional bias and just looking at everything put together, I think Brian Mbeumo might be the standout of the rest. And the reason that I say that, Leicester are obviously 18th for expected goals conceded this season. So they are the 3rd worst defence in the league. Mbeumo against newly promoted sides this season, I think has scored 14 and 15 against Southampton at home and Ipswich at home. So the only 2 games that he's played against newly promoted sides at home, he's got 2 braces. So 4 goals in 2 games. We also know that Mbeumo is a 90-minute man. He is on penalties, takes the odd set piece as well. So he's got all of that going for him too. The bookies have him at the highest percentage chance of scoring out of all of the options on this list. And then finally, he's one of only 3 players on this list that actually has a really good positional matchup, that Leicester concede almost all of their chances down their left flank, which is where Bryan Mbeumo operates. So what doesn't Bryan Mbeumo have going for him? I think he is playing really wide, which isn't necessarily a bad thing, but you can see, right, his goal threat is the worst on this list. So of all of the players on this list, 0.19 non-penalty expected goals. I would go as far as saying that's actually really poor. It's not even average, it's poor, especially when you're comparing it with other players on this list, which means that he's not getting as many chances to score goals. Now, can he score wonder goals? Yes, we've seen that. And against Leicester at home, you'd back his data to be better. And honestly, at home, Brentford just score goals for fun. So if we're looking at fixture, historical data, the defensive ability of the opponent, bookies odds, and the matchup, everything points towards Bryan Mbeumo honestly probably being the best option on this list. But his own performances and his data so far this season, I do think has left a little bit to be desired. It's the only thing that was putting me off Bryan Mbeumo as an option. I actually don't really like Heung-min Son as an option. I think Fulham are better defensively than people realise. I know they just shipped 4 goals to Wolves, but they only conceded 1.25 XG. And people don't like XG. You're probably watching the wrong channel if you don't like XG, but I think that suggests that they were unlucky to concede 4. There was a couple of really well-taken goals in there, especially from CUNHA. So I don't think Fulham are a bad defence. And also, Heung-min Son's not getting 90 minutes. Like, he came off again early in game week 12. So I just think when there are so many other good options, I'd rather back someone that's getting the minutes and not playing against a good defence. And you can see here, Fulham are 6th for expected goals conceded this season. So for me, especially given as well, they don't concede as many chances down their right-hand side, I just don't see this as a fantastic fixture or game for Heung-min Son. Someone that I do really like this week, despite being the only one on this list away from home, is Bukayo Saka. Arsenal are just flying with Ødegaard back in the team. Like, they've dismantled Nottingham Forest and Sporting relatively easily there. And they're not bad defences either of them, especially Nottingham Forest. They could have had a couple more in that game. Saka has the best creativity on this list. He's created 14 big chances this season. He's got okay goal threat, but you can see it is one of the lowest on this list. It's nowhere near close to the likes of JOAO Pedro or Palmer or Mohamed Salah. So the goal threat leaves a little bit to be desired. But he's not had Ødegaard for large spells of this season. With Ødegaard back in, we already saw he had a couple of chances to score. He got the goal. He's going to score more goals with Ødegaard in the team because he's got that link up on the right-hand side. I know West Ham are off the back of back-to-back clean sheets now. Fabianski's absolutely balling out, but this season they are still 16th for expected goals conceded. Am I going to captain Saka? I'll just say straight up, I'm not going to captain Saka. And the reason for that is Saka has shown on a consistent basis his ceiling isn't as high as some of the other players on this list. He very rarely will get 2 goals plus. He'll often get a goal and an assist or a goal, and he's very good for bonus points because of the key passes and chances created. But I want more ceiling from my attacker. Also, I don't like that it's away from home, and I don't like that West Ham are off the back of 2 clean sheets. They clearly aren't defending as poorly as they were earlier on in the season. And also, if we're looking at the positional matchup again, West Ham are actually strongest from their left-hand side. So it's not even that it's not a good point for Saka. They're actually very, very strong in terms of defending that left channel. So it's going to be very difficult for West Ham. If I was to predict the way this game would go, we are probably looking at something like 3-0, 3-1. And so Saka could do very well. I'm probably going to buy Saka this week. And I really think you should consider buying Saka in the coming game weeks. But in terms of captaincy, there are some other players that I would just like to captain slightly more. Which then leaves us with those 3 cheaper forwards in JOAO Pedro, Wood and CUNHA. If I'm saying who is the standout of the 3, even though his projected minutes are probably the lowest, this week it has to be JOAO Pedro for me. He's played very limited minutes, so it's difficult to sit here and say that actually he's the best player and his data will be, because he's not played enough minutes to suggest that. But so far, he's got the highest goal threat out of JOAO Pedro, Wood and CUNHA, and he's got the highest assist threat as well. We're going to discuss the cheap forwards in a second in a bit more detail. But that data is very promising. He's got the joint highest chance of scoring a goal with Wood out of those cheaper forward options. And Southampton are now officially the worst defence in the league. They've overtaken Ipswich marginally as the worst defence in the league for non-penalty expected goals conceded. So, the best fixture on paper, playing at home off the back of 2 goals and 2 assists in 88 minutes of football on penalties. And, again, one of only 3 players on this list that positionally the game suits him. Southampton concede most of their chances through the centre of the pitch. Whether he's operating as the 10 or the 9, that's where he's going to be picking up space and pockets. The only thing that doesn't go in favour of Joao Pedro, I'm mentioning here that his per 90 data is really, really solid there. He's probably not going to get 90 minutes, which is obviously not particularly good for Joao Pedro. Do you know what I've just noticed as well that I didn't say? For Mbeumo, Leicester will have a new manager bounce, right? They've sacked Steve Cooper. So that's another thing going again. I knew there was one more thing that was putting me off Brian Mbeumo, and I couldn't remember it. It is the potential new manager bounce. Now, I'm not expecting Leicester to be the best team in the world, but we do know, and we saw under Amorim, new manager bounce doesn't always work, but it is another thing that could put you off slightly. Although maybe the new manager will want to go for it. He's probably not going to want to take over and just park the bus, especially if it is someone like Rude who has been rumoured. So yeah, let's wait and see. But that is another thing that might put me off Brian Mbeumo. So yeah, Joao Pedro anyway, from the cheaper forward options, I think is fantastic. Which then leaves us with Wood and Cunha. I know Wood was benched in game week 12. He's honestly not going to be benched again. I can't see. I think that was just a rest after the international break. You'd expect him to get good minutes off the back of a rest too. Ipswich are very, very poor defensively. And listen, Chris Wood is in fantastic form this season. Like, he's scoring goals for fun. He's probably on penalties too. There's very little to dislike about Chris Wood. His data's not as strong as you would maybe expect it to be, given how many goals he scored this season. And it's not a good matchup for him. Ipswich don't concede a lot of chances through the centre of the pitch. They concede most of their chances on their on their left-hand flank, which is where Leif Davis operates. So I think Chris Wood's great. He's a fine captaincy option, but he probably wouldn't be my favourite option this week. And then Cunha, honestly, it's probably my least favourite option on this list for this week. And it's not me disrespecting Cunha. I've owned him since game week 7. He has been by far and away my favourite player to own this season. In fact, probably my top 3 players of all time to own in FPL. Because when I bought him in game week 7, he was 0.4% owned. So I jumped on Cunha when no one else believed. So I love him. And yes, in the last 2 game weeks, he scored 16 and 12 points. He's in a nice run of form. And he is an absolute baller. Like, the talent of the man. He's on penalties, 90 minutes, set pieces, everything. Like, as an asset, he's fantastic. I just think in a single game, I need to see more from Wolves. And I know they've just bagged 4 goals, but again, only 1.25 XG. I don't think Bournemouth are a bad defence. They're 9th for expected goals conceded. And if I was to predict the way this game would go, I would say 2-1 Bournemouth. Like, if you're taking your FPL hat off and you're asked to predict Bournemouth versus Wolves, Bournemouth are the better team. You'd expect Bournemouth to win that game, and you'd expect them to limit Wolves. I'm not expecting Wolves to score 3 or 4 goals here. Whereas if I look at the way that I think Liverpool could score 3 or 4 goals against City, I think Brentford could definitely score 3 or 4 against Leicester. I think Arsenal and Brighton could each score 3 or 4 goals, as could Forest. But I'm not expecting that from Wolves. So for me, as much as I think Cunha's a fantastic asset, I don't think this is a week to captain him. I think against Ipswich and Leicester coming up, those are the weeks where you might look to captain Cunha. So let me put that all together. The options that I like least, and I still think they're great options, but if I'm really trying to narrow it down, the options I like least on this list is probably Son and Cunha. Maybe I'm less keen just slightly on Saka and Wood as well, but I understand the justification. So if I was to say top 4 captaincy options this week, it's probably Salah, Palmer, Mbeumo, and Joao Pedro. So if you don't want to go for one of the more difficult fixtures in Salah or Palmer, basically I'm probably looking at Mbeumo or Joao Pedro. It is definitely a week to go different with captaincy, because the thing is, as much as Salah is a great option, he will be slightly less heavily captained because it is City. It will put people off, like myself included. I'm thinking, oh, I still think it's a great fixture for him, but I don't know if I definitely want to go for it. If you look at the models and algorithms, they will not be backing Salah this week. They will back the traditional data that City traditionally are a very good defence. You might then look at that and say, well, that's an advantage. That's an opportunity because people back against him. But I guess what I'm saying is I think there is an opportunity to go against the likes of Salah and Palmer this week. As of right now, in my own head, I'm probably saying, and this could change in like 10 minutes, Salah, I'm going to not sit on the fence. I'm going to give you an order. Salah, Mbeumo, Palmer, João Pedro. It's just opinion-based. There's very little to separate them. I like the fact that Salah, Mbeumo, and João Pedro, positionally, the matchup works for them. I like the fixtures for them individually as well. So I'll leave it there. I would love to know who you're backing for captaincy. Anyone on this list, plus Erling Haaland, by the way, plus anyone else you might be considering, like Jackson, Wissa, they are also both really good options as well. Like, you could go for someone completely rogue. But for me, I would just look at the Salah matchup for what it is right now, and don't get too disheartened by the fact that it's Man City, or don't get too blown away by the fact, yeah, City are really good. They're not good defensively at the moment. They're just shipping goals for fun. Liverpool looking good, and it's a matchup that I think suits Mohamed Salah as well. So do bear that in mind before you look to go against him. But yeah, let me know in the comments who you're looking to captain for Game Week 13. I can't believe I just recorded a 20-minute section on captaincy. That is like that is triple the length of an FPL Focal video just on captaincy alone. But hopefully that was helpful for you. I just wanted to cover it in depth because it's the main decision, I think, this week. So moving on to some other stuff then. Erling Haaland. Do you sell him this week? Is this the point to jump off? Is there any reason to keep him? There are a few questions around him, so I will briefly cover it, and then we'll move on to the best forwards to bring in. So if you're not selling Haaland this week and you're just interested in the best forwards to bring in this week, just skip to the next section. It will be time-stamped. But if you do have Erling Haaland and you're wondering, like, is this the time to jump off? I would say you can simplify the decision. If you don't own Salah, yes. Salah at the moment is just a better asset than Haaland. Like, straight up, even if they were the same price, Salah is just better than Haaland at the moment. There's no overcomplication needed there. So if you don't own Salah, yes, sell Haaland, and yes, do it this week. And yes, I would do it for a -4. That is my opinion as things stand. Let's say you own Salah already, though, and you have Haaland on top of Salah, which is the position I'm in. The next thing you need to think about is, do you have other issues in your team that desperately need sorting? Right? Because if you have other issues in your team that need sorting, selling Erling Haaland shouldn't be a priority if you've got like 2 fit defenders, or your front line is just stinking it up and you want to bring in a João Pedro and you want to bring in a CUNHA and you've got other things that you want to do with your front line outside of Erling Haaland. Then no, rushing Haaland out is never a priority unless you desperately need the funds. The other thing to note is if you've got Haaland and Salah, you probably don't have one of Saka or Palmer. And if you don't have one of Saka or Palmer, the next thing you need to think to yourself is, how much do I want to own that player? And also, what can I do with the funds as well? So to put it into my position, I have Salah, Palmer, and Haaland. It means I don't have Saka. And when I look at it, I want Saka desperately. I think with Ødegaard back and the fixture run they're about to go on, Saka is excellent value. The next thing is, I want a mid-priced forward in my team. I think Isak, Jackson, and Watkins all offer really good value. I'd like one in my team. And the final thing to note is I have Dibbling as my 8th attacker, and I would like to upgrade Dibbling so that I can rotate Rodgers in and out. When you consider the 3 upgrades that I can make to my team, and that leaves me 1.2 in the bank, by the way, so it leaves me flexible with money. When you consider all of that together, selling Haaland just makes a lot of sense for my team, especially as I can do all of that for free. So I do think it's incredibly team dependent, but I think if you don't have Salah, you've got to do it. And if you want the other one of Saka or Palmer that you don't own, if you do own Salah, well, then I still think it's worthwhile. And the other reason that selling Haaland makes so much sense right now, before I then give you the pros of keeping him, is the other forwards are just brilliant. Like I said, Jackson, Isak, Watkins, as the most expensive 3 outside of Haaland, are all offering insane value. Then when you say with João Pedro, you're saving almost 10 million. I can't even wrap my head around that. 10 million. 10 million in FPL. That's a 10th of your budget you are saving by going for João Pedro over Haaland. And João Pedro probably outscores Haaland, you expect maybe over the next couple of games. Yes, it just makes sense, I think, to sell Erling Haaland in a lot of positions. But on the flip side, Haaland's data is the best we've ever seen it in the Prem. The data this season is better than last season and the season before in terms of non-penalty expected goals. It's up at 0.92. The man is getting comfortably the most chances in the league. He's averaging almost 2 big chances per 90. So in terms of Haaland's not struggling in this City system, and even with City, and City are stinking it up, even with City stinking it up, Haaland is not struggling to get chances, which is remarkable, really. So people point to De Bruyne coming back. He doesn't need De Bruyne because he's already getting so many chances per game. It's absolutely wild the amount of chances he's accumulating. So with Haaland, it's good to know that even when City are bad, Haaland doesn't need City to be good to get the chances. So if City start to turn it on now, and he gets 3, 4 big chances per 90. I mean, the man can go absolutely nuclear in any given week. Would I be surprised if he grabs a couple of goals against Liverpool? Not massively, to be honest. And then in game week 14, it's a midweek deadline. He's got Forest at home. You could argue there's not many standout captains in 14. You could argue that Haaland is the standout captain, especially because he's at home. Then goes into Crystal Palace away, who have not been defending overly well. Then it's United at home, who just shipped loads of chances to Ipswich. We don't know how long it will take to bed into that system under Amorim. Like, yes, there's absolutely justification to hold on to Erling Haaland. You don't need me to sit here and say Haaland is fantastic. Across his career, his finishing has been wonderful. He's still getting the chances. And in the midweek game against Feyenoord, yes, City threw away a 3-0 lead, but Haaland grabbed a brace, a penalty and an open play goal. And in any given game, we saw this with Mohamed Salah, if a player is a good player and they're on penalties and they play 90 minutes, you can come away with a brace quite easily. Salah got gifted a goal. He really did. As much as Liverpool fans didn't like it when I said it, he was gifted that first goal. And then, yes, he created the chance for the penalty, but he then scores a penalty and he comes away with 13 points. It's very easy for these good players to do that. So I guess what I'm saying is, I think for most teams, it probably does make sense to sell Haaland and redistribute the funds until game week 18-19 when the fixtures improve. But could I also see Haaland come away with 6-7 attacking returns over the next 5 or more? Yes, because it's Erling Haaland and he can do that in any week, but he's not doing it at the moment. So I'll leave it there. I think I'm going to sell Haaland this week for my team, which I'll discuss in tomorrow's team selection video, just because it makes sense in terms of it's not just selling Haaland to do one thing. It's selling Haaland to buy Saka, a mid-price forward, upgrade Dibbling, get money in the bank to improve my defence. And I'm not looking, and I guess that's the key thing, is I'm not looking to desperately captain Haaland in any of the next 5. Game week 14 is the only one where you could justify it, but I also don't mind handing the armband to someone like Mohamed Salah instead. I'd love to know down below, if you're still watching at this point and you do have Erling Haaland, are you planning on selling him this week, or do you think you're going to hold him a little bit longer? So there were so many questions that came in this week around buying forwards. And I think for a lot of people, they are selling Erling Haaland, in which case you have all of the money in the world and more. But even if you're not, and you still got all of the money you want and more, and you've got loads in the bank, money should always be incredibly important at the forefront of your thinking. You should never ignore money, because even if right now you're sat there and you're like, if I buy JOAO Pedro, I've got 6 million in the bank. Do you know what? Next week, you'll probably find a way to use it. And even if you don't next week, you might use a couple of million. Then at some point, you'll be sat there thinking, money is very tight at the moment. You never go through an entire season sat there with loads of money in the bank, especially as we get into the busy period. All you need, by the way, is an injury to one of your slightly cheaper assets, and you're like, actually, I don't really like any of the cheaper assets. Maybe I'd want to stretch that cheaper player to a slightly more expensive one, and then you start using the money again. So all of that to say, money needs to come into your consideration when you're buying a player, regardless of if you feel like you need to use that money right now. So what I have done is I've taken 13 of the forwards that are in discussion or that I think are decent options for this week and beyond. And again, I really try not to sit on the fence in these videos, so I have given them a Raptor ranking. It's always very difficult to rank players because so much comes into it, like your own teams. Again, what you can do with the money in the near term versus the long term. The entry point this week versus next week. Like if you're asking me next week, it might be a different conversation versus the entry point this week. And when I say entry point, it's like the immediate fixture. Because whilst you're not bringing in this player for 1 week, you are bringing them in this week. And for someone like Jackson, he's got Aston Villa at home this week. It's not as easy as someone like a JOAO Pedro versus Southampton at home. So these are all of the things to consider. On this table, I've got obviously their price, because it's very important. Their minutes per game, which tells us how many minutes on average they play per game. Do take into account that players like CUNHA at the start of the season come on in the 30th minute, with 30 minutes left, because he was injured. So that will reduce, his minutes are definitely better than 81 minutes per game, just for an example. I've got their non-penalty expected goal involvement per 90, which is goal and assist threat together. I've got their shots in the box per 90, their fixture difficulty rating from game week 13 to 18, according to Fantasy Football Hub. And then, like I said, my Raptor ranking, which is how they have been ranked on this table. By the way, Fantasy Football Hub are still offering a 30-day free trial and 30% off at the end of that if you use the link in my description. All of the stats that I use in these videos is courtesy of Fantasy Football Hub. So I would definitely recommend checking it out. There is a link down below to get that 30-day free trial. Get it before it ends, because it's obviously your best chance to check it out without having to commit to paying straight away. So the best player to bring in this week for forwards is JOAO Pedro for me. I actually, 10 minutes before I recorded this video, switched CUNHA and JOAO Pedro. So 10 minutes before I started recording, I had Cunha ahead of Joao Pedro, which just tells you how close I think this is. But I'm not going to sit on the fence. I'm going to say Joao Pedro. And honestly, all that comes down to is entry point. When I look at the fixtures coming up for Joao Pedro and Brighton, in the next 3 weeks, Brighton play against 2 newly promoted sides. So the entry point, especially Southampton at home this week, is just better for Joao Pedro than Cunha. In the next couple, Cunha's got Bournemouth and Everton. And whilst I think he could score goals, and Wolves will put goals past those two teams, you would imagine, if I was to predict the Wolves versus Bournemouth game, I'd say 2-1 Bournemouth. And if I was to predict the Wolves versus Everton game, I'd say maybe say something like 1-1. Like, Everton are limiting teams at the moment, and they're not conceding as many chances as they did at the start of the season, let's say that. Like, Sean Dyche is working his magic a little bit. So I just think in terms of entry point and the fixtures over the next couple, I really, really like Joao Pedro more than Cunha. Now, if we look across the next 5 or 6 game weeks, like I said, from 13 to 18, Brighton and Wolves have the best set of fixtures. Like, he's got, in 16 and 17, he's got Ipswich and Leicester, Cunha. So if you're just if you're not ignoring the entry point, but if you're looking not at this specific week and just measuring over the next 6 game weeks, I don't think there's much to separate Joao Pedro and Cunha's fixtures at all. What there is a lot to separate them is the data if they get consistent minutes. So if Joao Pedro's minutes do start to improve, his data, I do think, will consistently be better than Cunha. They're probably both on penalties. Yes, Cunha does take corners as well, but Joao Pedro's got a lot of open play creativity because he's playing in that number 10 role. So I just think when you take into account that he's 1.4 million cheaper, and I know money might not be an issue now, but you need to take that into account, Joao Pedro is just marginally better for me. If I was to try and make a case for Cunha being better, it is minutes. That is the only thing. Is Cunha is a 90-minute man. I know it says 81 minutes because, again, at the start of the season, he was coming back from an injury and he got like 30 minutes and then 60 minutes at the start of the season. And then he did get one early sub against Man City when he came off in like the 63rd minute. But outside of that, it's been basically 90 minutes every week. And that is a massive advantage. Cunha now on 2 occasions this season has scored in 85 plus minutes. So Cunha does get a lot of late goals because he's always on the pitch and he's very, very fit. And because he takes corners, free kicks, and penalties. There are so many routes to points for Cunha. So in terms of an overall asset, if they were the same price and had the same fixtures, I think Cunha is a marginally better asset than Joao Pedro. But because he's 1.4 million more, and because the entry point is better for Joao Pedro, I'm going to say that Joao Pedro is, if I was to only bring in one this week, I'd bring in Joao Pedro. So hopefully that helps you. But I do think that decision's very close. I then think after those top 2, you've then got the next 2, which is Isak and Jackson. Again, I think this is very close. And all it comes down to is the same 2 things that I've been honing on about, which is I think Jackson could miss the midweek fixture against Southampton in 14. And if he doesn't, when I say miss it, I think Nkunku could start. And even if Nkunku doesn't start, I think Jackson could get a very early sub to give Nkunku some decent minutes. So, and if he misses the Southampton game, that's the best game that they've got coming up. So that would be one concern. And also, he is still on 4 yellows. Now, he's doing very well to avoid the 4 yellow cards, but that is something to take into account. So I think, look, if you look at Jackson and Isak's data, it's almost identical in terms of non-penalty expected goal involvement per 90 and shots in the box per 90. If we're looking at fixtures, I think they're very, very similar overall as well. So I don't think there's much to separate the pair of them at all. But when Jackson's got those 2 extra things that just make me doubt his minutes moving forward, I would say I prefer Isak. Now, some people will say, but Callum Wilson might start a game. And honestly, yeah, he could. I'm not saying that I definitely know that Isak's going to start every game, but I think he will. Also, Isak's on penalties, Jackson's not. So I think that's another thing that just about, I would say I favour Isak over Jackson, but I don't think there's that much to separate the pair of them. So for me right now, the top 4, and in a league of their own, is Joao Pedro, Cunha, Isak, Jackson in that order. Please let me know in the comments, how would you rate those 4? Would you rate them in the same order as me? I'm very tempted to switch Joao Pedro and Cunha still, but I'm just about to say Joao Pedro. After that, I think Watkins and Welbeck deserve some consideration. Watkins, it's just the price. And again, you might not need the money now, especially if you're selling Erling Haaland. So maybe you go for him. Like, he's had the most shots in the box per 90 out of anyone on this list. He's got the 3rd best non-penalty expected goal involvement per 90 after Wissa and Joao Pedro. His minutes do continue to be pretty good. And after Chelsea, he's got Brentford at home and Southampton at home. So I think if Watkins was 8 million, I think I'd have him ahead of both Jackson and Isak. But the fact that he's 9 million, I just think it could put you in a tricky position. But could you own Watkins for the next 3 games and then sell him after that? You could. But at that point, I think I'd rather just have Isak or Jackson in place. So I like Watkins. He's just a little bit expensive for me. On Welbeck, the fixtures we spoke about are great. His minutes continue to look really good. 85 minutes per game this season. And yes, I still think he is first choice number 9 because I think João Pedro is so good in that 10 role. But if they did want to play someone like Minte on the right, Matoma on the left, and let's say they still wanted to play Ruta in a position in the middle, I think Welbeck would drop out before João Pedro. I think João Pedro is first choice ahead of Welbeck in terms of if only one of them is going to play, because João Pedro can play as the 9 or the 10. So I could see a situation soon where it is João Pedro and Ruta through the centre, or, by the way, Ferguson is still available and can still play that role too. So I do think that Welbeck will miss one game in the next 8. I do think that. But I also think João Pedro probably misses one game in the next 8 as well. So Welbeck's minutes are probably still going to be very good. No, his data isn't the strongest on this list, but it's still not bad. And with everyone clamouring to get João Pedro in, Welbeck now feels a bit of a differential. So he's still in my top 6. He's still a fantastic buy. And if João Pedro didn't exist, Welbeck would be one of my favourite players to bring in this week. It's just when you look at João Pedro for 0.4 million cheaper with everything he offers, it's difficult to overlook him. So yeah, I like Welbeck, but he's not one of my top options. If you aren't convinced by CUNHA, João Pedro, Welbeck, all of these other players, 2 players that I really like at a cheaper price is actually Evanilson and Delap. They've both had 3 big chances in the last 2 game weeks. They've both got okay data. And over the next few, I actually like the fixtures for both. Fantasy Football Hub do not like the fixtures for Ipswich, which is fair enough. But I think over the next 4 games, I could see both of them doing really, really well. I've been very impressed with Delap across the last 2 games, by the way. He's accumulated almost 2 XG in 2 games. Against Man United, he could have had a couple of goals. And I do just think he's a very good footballer. So yeah, I think Evanilson and Delap, if you're looking for 2 players that aren't like really obvious to bring in at the moment, I'd expect both of them to get pretty good minutes, and I do like the fixtures and matchups that they've got coming up. I've got Havertz in 9th, maybe a little bit harsh. He's played 90 minutes in every game this season, apart from Game Week 12, where he played 0 minutes. I do think that was just a rest, to be honest. I think you can't play a player 90 minutes every single game, and it was a game that clearly he trusted his team to perform, and they did. So I think Havertz is probably going to play in Game Week 13, unless there is some sort of issue that he's managing that we don't know about. But let's just assume that he's fine. The only reason that he is as low as 9th is with his price, I just prefer Isak and Jackson. I'd even prefer to stretch to Watkins. And I think that the best Arsenal triple up is double defence and Saka. So with Havertz, it's not even as much as just Havertz. It's, I would prefer to have, if I was choosing afresh, probably Gabriel, Timber and Saka would be my 3 first choice. And I think Raya and Saliba offer great value too. I'd even be slightly tempted by an Erdegaard if you want to move away from a Bruno or an Mbeumo coming up. So with Havertz, it's more that he blocks a lot of other good Arsenal players in the future. Let's say one of Trossard or Martinelli get injured, by the way. Then maybe even one of them at a cheaper price could be a good option if we expect them to start most games. We're then looking at players that I just wouldn't be that desperate to bring in. We've got Chris Wood in 10th. And by the way, I've actually got Wood and Wissa's prices wrong. So Wood is 6.6 million, Wissa is 6.1 million. So switch those prices around. But yeah, Chris Wood, I just think given the fixtures, he wouldn't be my priority. This week, it's brilliant against Ipswich at home. But when I look at the data, it's never been great for Chris Wood and he still scores. But he will struggle to overperform at that rate on a consistent basis, which also goes for someone like CUNHA, by the way. But I just wonder, like, you've missed all of those goals already. Are you expecting him to continue at that rate? If you are, bring him in. The fixtures aren't as bad as maybe I suggested at first. Like, Fantasy Football Hub have them at 8th. Like, better fixtures, according to them, until Game Week 18 than someone like Watkins or Jackson. I don't think they're that good personally. They've got a couple of good fixtures in there. And the Ipswich one this week obviously makes it not bad at all in terms of bringing him in. But I just think I would rather target some other players like João Pedro and CUNHA who have, for me, better fixtures and are in better form than Chris Wood, who, by the way, hasn't blanked many times this season. It just feels like it feels a bit points chasing for me, is what I would say on Chris Wood, but I still think he's a fine option to bring in. You might be surprised to see Strand Larsen in 11th, considering that he's got incredible fixtures and he's got really good minutes. I might regret putting him this low. His data is so bad. And data isn't everything, but it's so bad. 0.27 non-penalty expected goal involvement per 90. He's got 0.24 expected goals per 90 and 0.03 expected assists. That means that if Strand Larsen played 90 minutes every game, which he doesn't, by the way, he's averaging 82, but let's say he plays 90 every game, we are expecting him to score 1 goal in every 4 games. That's really bad, right? I would rather own most other players on this list. So if you've got Strand Larsen, maybe you hold him and just hope that with the fixtures, he'll get more returns. And he has returned a few times this season. He got an assist, obviously, in Game Week 12. But this data is not promising at all. Like, no one is even close to being as bad as him in terms of data. Chris Wood is the second worst on this list. But Chris Wood is also a great finisher, and he's also on penalties, whereas Strand Larsen isn't. So I just don't see anything apart from the fixtures going in, and maybe the minutes going in favour of Strand Larsen. If you went for Strand Larsen over CUNHA, it's been a horrible swing. All that I have seen, data-wise and eye test-wise, is that it's probably going to get worse. So would I sell Strand Larsen? It's a very luxury transfer, but if you have the free transfers to do it, I'd honestly be tempted. Can he score goals when they've got the likes of Ipswich and Leicester coming up? Yes, absolutely. So don't sell him and then blame me if over the next 5 or 6 Strand Larsen gets 3 or 4 goals, because the fixtures are there, and often fixtures breed form. But we've seen that CUNHA has been doing it recently, and Strand Larsen's just not. So for me, he would not be a player that I would be looking to bring in at a cheap price. And then Solanke, lots of people still love Solanke. The fixtures aren't massively there for me. The minutes are, the data looks good. I just don't think, like, I'm a data-driven manager, but I also do rely on my eye test. And when I watch Spurs, Solanke doesn't do it for me. Like I said, he turns like a truck. He's always caught really deep in the Spurs team because he's trying to link up play. He holds up the ball well. And then Spurs counter and transition really quickly. And you can just see Solanke's trying to get into the box in time, but he doesn't always manage to do so. And Spurs are just so unpredictable. Like, for 7.9 million, I'd rather Jackson. I'd rather Isak for a little bit more. I'd rather CUNHA for 0.9 less. JOAO Pedro is definitely worth the 2.3 million saving. Solanke's not bad, and if you've got him, you can absolutely keep him for this week against Fulham at home. It feels like an okay matchup for him. But I just think there are other players that I'd rather own. In last is actually Wissa, and again, Wissa is 6.1, not 6.6, but he's actually got the best non-penalty expected goal involvement on this list per 90. Like, Wissa's data is so good. He's involved in so many big chances, and this week they play against Leicester at home. But after this week, the fixtures do tail off for Brentford. The other thing with Wissa is he's getting early subs for Thiago. They've spent a lot of money on Thiago. If Wissa drops 1 or 2 stinkers, I wouldn't be surprised to see Thiago start a game instead. And to be honest, Thiago might just start one of the midweek games. You never know, because again, they've spent a lot of money on him. They need to build up his minutes. And I just don't know how well they'll function with Thiago, Wissa, and Mbeumo in the team. So yeah, I do think we will continue to see early subs for him. So given the fixtures term, and given the early subs, even with the data and how good it's been, Wissa's not a player I'd be looking to buy at the moment. Would I sell him? Honestly, probably not. I'd probably keep him until he does miss a game. And then you say, right, now his minutes are expected to be quite a lot lower. So there we go. Wow, what a long couple of... I've only done a couple of sections of this video, and it's going to be incredibly long. But to recap, I don't think you can go wrong buying JOAO Pedro, CUNHA, Isak, or Jackson this week. And to some extent, Watkins and Welbeck, I think you can group in there as well. But for me, given price, entry point, data, manager's comments, eye test, aura, whatever you want to say about him, JOAO Pedro is that guy at the moment. I just do worry that he might miss either Game Week 14 because it's midweek, or Game Week 15 because they play Thursday to Sunday. So there is a chance he only plays 2 of the next 3. But given how many, he's got 4 returns in 88 minutes, he might not need to start all 3 of them to be a fantastic option. Let me know which forwards you're looking to own as your front 3 in Game Week 13. So guys, there we have it. That is my Game Week 13 preview, covering only a couple of topics today, but in as much detail as I can to hopefully help you with those key decisions. If you did enjoy today's video in the slightly different style, please do smash that like button. And if you are new around here, make sure to subscribe as well. Thank you very much for watching. Until next time, bye-bye.